Hello everyone. So now we are done with the structure of lungs, mechanism of breathing, spirometry and all that, right? Now, so almost we are done with the external respiration, the first respiration step. Okay, the second respiration was the internal respiration, where the exchange of gases was taking place exactly. And it was divided into two different parts. That is the exchange of gases taking place at the surface of lungs and the blood, okay, which is present in the lungs particularly, okay. And the second part of this exchange was taking place in the tissue, between the tissue and the blood, okay. So we'll be discussing this exchange of gases at both the surfaces, okay. So let us start. So gases exchange between lungs and blood and the blood with tissue fluid occurs by simple diffusion. This is something you have to keep in mind, that exchange of gases in all over this respiration will be basically taking place by simple diffusion. That will be from the higher concentration to lower concentration, or in the gases term it will be from higher partial pressure to the lower partial pressure, okay. So let us start with the gaseous exchange in the lungs. What all differences will be, how this gaseous exchange will take place in the lungs, okay. Now at the alveoli we can see this is the alveoli, okay. So at the alveoli level the gaseous exchange occurs through respiratory membrane, okay. It will be occurring through the respiratory membrane, which is 0.2 millimeter thick. So this is the respiratory membrane, which is around 0.2 millimeter thick and consists of three layers, which will be consisting of three layers. So here we have got three layers. What all layers are there? The first one is the alveolar epithelium. This is the alveolar epithelium. This is the outermost layer of the alveoli is the alveolar epithelium. Second, this is the basement membrane. This is the basement membrane, okay. And the third one is the capillary endothelium. This is the capillary endothelium. So we can see we have got three different layers present at the surface of the, we can say, the surface of the exchange of gases, and these layers are called a respiratory membrane, which is of around 0.2 millimeter thick in nature, okay. So will be consisting three layers, that is alveolar layer and alveolar epithelium, basement membrane and the capillary endothelium, okay. Now the respiratory membrane has a limit of gaseous exchange between alveoli and the pulmonary blood. So this respiratory membrane has a limit of gaseous exchange between the alveoli and the pulmonary blood. So pulmonary blood is that blood which is flowing into the lungs, okay. So it will be responsible for exchange between the alveoli, this is the alveoli, and the pulmonary blood. It is called diffusion capacity. What is diffusion capacity? The volume of gas that diffuses through the membrane per minute for a pressure difference of 1 mmHg. So we know that the diffusion will be taking place due to the change in pressure only, difference in pressure only. So that volume of gas that diffuses through the membrane, the volume of gas this diffuses through the membrane per minute for a pressure difference of 1 mmHg is called as diffusion capacity, okay. Now let us see. This exchange is further dependent on the solubility of the diffusion gases. This exchange or this diffusion is mainly depending on the diffusion capacity, okay. And the other thing is that it is also dependent on the solubility of the diffusion gases, the main gases which are being solubilized, okay, and which are basically getting diffused. It will be also depending on that solubility of those gases. So we can see as the solubility of the carbon dioxide is 20 to 25 times higher than the oxygen. The carbon dioxide solubility of the carbon dioxide is much more higher than the oxygen, that is around 20 to 25 times, okay. So what happens? The amount of CO2 that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference is partial pressure is much higher than the compared to O2. So because the carbon dioxide has got higher solubility, it will be able to diffuse at much higher rate compared to the oxygen, okay. But when we see the partial pressure of oxygen, here we can see the partial pressure of oxygen is the alveoli is much higher than the deoxygenated blood. So here this is the deoxygenated blood and this is the alveoli and this is the atmospheric air, okay. So oxygen, the partial pressure of oxygen, that is PO2, the partial pressure of oxygen is in alveoli is around 104, okay. Then the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli is 104, while the deoxygenated blood which is flowing in the lung is only 40. So it has got higher concentration, higher partial pressure, and over here low pressure. So what will happen? Then so the partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli is higher than that deoxygenated blood in the capillary of the pulmonary arteries. As the gases diffuse from higher to low concentration, the movement of oxygen will take place from alveoli to blood, because the higher concentration is over here in the alveoli. Okay, and the reverse in the case of carbon dioxide. When we see in the carbon dioxide, the partial pressure for carbon dioxide is low in the alveoli and high in the blood, which is deoxygenated blood in the capillaries. Okay, so here what will happen? The carbon dioxide will move from the capillary to the lungs, capillary to the alveoli. So the oxygen, due to having high partial pressure, will be moving from the alveoli to the deoxygenated blood, while the carbon dioxide, due to having low partial pressure in the alveoli and high partial pressure in the deoxygenated blood, what will happen? It will move from the deoxygenated blood in the capillary to the alveoli. Okay, so that's about the differences between the partial pressure at the blood and the deoxygenated blood and the alveoli. Okay, next is we can see even here as well. So this is the impure blood and this is the alveoli. Okay, so there's the exchange between this alveoli and the impure blood in this lungs. So this exchange is taking place in the lungs. Okay, so the impure blood, the alveoli will be having the concentration of the partial pressure of oxygen is 104 mm of Hg, and over here the partial pressure of the oxygen is around only 40 mm of Hg. So the movement will occur from high concentration, low concentration, that is from alveoli to the impure blood. Okay, and even this alveoli will be having low compared to the environmental. In the environment it is 159, and hence it is moving from environment to alveoli, and from alveoli it will move to the impure blood. Okay, now when we see about the carbon dioxide, so carbon dioxide in the case of impure blood is around 45 mm of Hg, while in this alveolar air it will be of around only 40 mm of Hg. So this movement of carbon dioxide will take place from this impure blood to the alveolar air, and outside the body, that is in the environment, it will be only about 0.3 mm of Hg. So we can say it will move from the alveolar air to the outside of the body. So this is the exchange taking place between the lungs and the lungs, or we can say alveolar sac and the blood in the lungs. Okay, next exchange is taking place in the tissue. So first exchange what we have seen in the exchange of gases taking place in the lungs, gases of exchange taking place in the lungs. So what is happening? The air coming inside with having high concentration of oxygen, this will be basically having high partial pressure of the oxygen, and the blood which is coming in this blood capillary will be having, which we will call as impure blood, or we can say there's an deoxygenated blood, will be having low partial pressure of oxygen. So the movement of oxygen will take place from this cavity to this capillary. So the movement will take from this alveoli to the blood, while the carbon dioxide will be having just opposite condition. The carbon dioxide will be at high partial pressure in this blood capillary, while at low partial pressure in the alveolar cavity. So what will happen? The carbon dioxide will move from this capillary to this alveoli. Okay, and hence the exchange of both carbon dioxide and oxygen has taken place at this surface. That surface is called as respiratory membrane, which consists 2 layers, that is 3 layers: alveolar epithelium, basement membrane, and the capillary endothelium. Okay, that was about the respiratory exchange taking place at the surface of the alveoli. Okay, next exchange is taking place at the tissue. Next exchange is taking place in the tissue. Okay, so in the tissue, this exchange will be taking place between the blood and the tissue. The exchange will be taking place between the blood and the tissue. Now the partial pressure of the oxygen in the oxygenated blood is higher. When we see the oxygenated blood which is carried from the lungs to the different parts of body through the heart, okay, will be having high concentration or high partial pressure of oxygen, that is around 95 mm of Hg, while the partial pressure of the oxygen in the tissues where it is used up, where the oxygen will be used up for different purposes, will be low. It will be of around 40 mm of Hg. So we can say the movement of the gases will be taking place from the oxygenated blood to the tissues. Okay, while for the carbon dioxide it will be just opposite. The partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the oxygenated blood is lower, that is 40 mm of Hg, and that in the cells it will be produced, the carbon dioxide will be produced due to metabolic reactions, and it will be 45 mm of Hg. So the diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide will take place in this tissue in such a manner that the oxygen will move from the oxygenated blood or we can say oxygenated blood in the blood capillary to the tissues, or we can say interstitial fluid of the tissues, through which it will be taken up by the cells. Okay, and while the carbon dioxide will be moving from the tissues to the blood, that is the oxygenated blood. Okay, oxygenated blood. So let us see here This is the second part. This is the part which is below over here is the second part, which shows the exchange of gases taking place in the tissue. So here we can see this pure blood will be consisting high amount of oxygen, that is partial pressure of the oxygen is 95 mmHg, while the tissue fluid, or we can say interstitial fluid, will be having low amount of oxygen, that is partial pressure of oxygen is only 40 mmHg. So the movement of oxygen will take place from this pure blood to this tissue fluid, and through this tissue fluid this oxygen will be taken up by the cell. Okay, while for the carbon dioxide it will be just opposite to that. Okay, so in the case of tissues or the cell, due to metabolic reactions, the carbon dioxide level will be high and it will be getting the tissue fluid, so it will be around 45 mmHg, and the oxygenated blood, which is the pure blood, will be carrying a low amount of carbon dioxide, that is of around only 40 mmHg. So the movement of carbon dioxide will again occur from the high concentration to low concentration, that is from the tissue fluid to the pure blood, and hence this is how the exchange of oxygen carbon dioxide will taking place at the tissue. So this is about the tissue diffusion of the gases taking place at the two surfaces, that is in the lungs. The first one is the lungs and the second one is the tissue. Okay, in the case of lungs, the movement of oxygen will occur from the alveolar sac to the deoxygenated blood. Okay, while the movement of carbon dioxide will take place from the deoxygenated blood to the alveolar sac. Okay, according to pressure differences. Okay, while in the case of the tissue, at the tissue level, what will happen? The movement of oxygen will occur from the oxygenated blood to tissue, while the movement of carbon dioxide will occur from the tissue level to the blood, the oxygenated blood. Okay, so over there also, due to the according to the change in the difference in the pressure, partial pressure, and according to the difference in the partial pressure, and it will be moving in a simple diffusion manner by the simple diffusion. Okay, that was about the gaseous exchange taking place in both the surfaces. Now let us see here you can again see this. So this inspired air come inside, having the higher amount of higher amount of oxygen and lower amount of CO2. Okay, now this will basically transfer, this is an alveoli, will be transferred to the deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood will be having high amount of carbon dioxide, which will be transferred to the alveoli, while having low amount of oxygen, which will be taking up this oxygen. This is taken to the heart. From this heart it will be utilized for the different parts of body. Over there the oxygen will be given to the tissues from high concentration to low concentration, while the CO2 will be taken up by the tissue from the high concentration low concentration, and will be moved to the heart and then to the blood again, move to the heart and then to the lungs again. So this is the whole circulation will be going on, and all throughout the body, this diffusion, this transfer of the gases or the exchange of gases will be taking place only with the help of simple diffusion. So it is totally a passive transport system. It is totally working on the passive transport system, and no energy is required for the transfer of these gases. No energy is required for the exchange of gases at any point of time at any place in the body. Okay, that's important to be noted. So everywhere this transfer of the exchange of gases will be taking place only on the basis of the partial difference in the partial pressure, okay, and nowhere the ATP is utilized, neither the ATP or non-interruptible energy molecule will be utilized for this exchange of gases. Okay, that's about the exchange of gases. Now let us see the transport of gases. Now the main two gases which are present in the which are responsible for this, which are the main part of the respiration, are the carbon dioxide and the oxygen. Now let us see how both the gases are being transported in the body. So the oxygen, when we say about the oxygen, 97 to 99% of the oxygen, so 97% to 99% of total oxygen is being transported in the form of oxyhemoglobin. So now we know that the oxygen has got a binding capacity to the hemoglobin protein. It has got a high affinity toward the hemoglobin protein in the blood cells, in the RBC. So RBC will be having the hemoglobin protein, which is a proteinaceous in nature, containing a red colored pigment called as heme. So this heme will be having high affinity for this oxygen binding. So what will happen? 97 to 99% of the total oxygen will be binding to this heme group of the hemoglobin protein, and hence it will be responsible for carrying this oxygen throughout the body. It will be responsible for carrying out the oxygen throughout the body. So this, when this oxygen binds to this hemoglobin, that this structure, this molecule will be called as oxyhemoglobin. It will be called as oxyhemoglobin. Okay. Now this, all of the out of total oxygen present in the body and which is transported throughout the body, 97 to 99% of oxygen is being transported in the form of oxyhemoglobin, while 1 to 3%, while of around 1 to 3% of total oxygen is transported as a dissolved form in water or plasma. So mainly 97% to 99% is totally transported by the in the form of oxyhemoglobin, while 1 to 3% of the total oxygen is being transported in the dissolved form in water of plasma. Okay, so let us see how it is being formed. So oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. Oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. It is a curve which is basically studied. It is a curve which is basically studied, okay, for the purpose of studying the transportation of oxygen. So this curve is plotted between the partial pressure of oxygen and percentage saturation of the hemoglobin with O2. So this is plotted between this partial pressure of oxygen. So this is the partial pressure of oxygen beginning from 0 to the up to 110. Okay. So this curve is plotted between the, on x-axis we are taking the partial pressure of oxygen, on the x-axis we are taking the partial pressure of oxygen, while on the y-axis we are seeing the percentage of oxygen saturation in hemoglobin. And the y-axis we are basically seeing the percentage saturation of hemoglobin, okay, with O2. Now this curve, this oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve is sigmoid in nature. It's sigmoid shaped. It is sigmoid shaped, or we can say S shaped. Okay, at this 50, at the 50 percentage, or we can say P50 is at point. It is P50. This is what does it? This y-axis signifies? It signifies the saturation of hemoglobin. It signifies the saturation of hemoglobin, right? So at this 50% of the saturation, when the saturation of hemoglobin is at half, when the saturation of the hemoglobin is at 50%, this point is defined as the point which is basically where the oxygen, where the hemoglobin is half saturated, okay. So P50, it is defined as the partial pressure of oxygen at which the hemoglobin is half saturated. Okay. Now in oxygenated blood, the hemoglobin is 97%. We know that in the oxygenated blood, the hemoglobin is 97% over here. In the oxygenated blood, the hemoglobin is 97%. Okay. With oxygen, in which partial pressure of oxygen is 100 mmHg. So when the partial pressure of oxygen is 100 mmHg, it means it will be at high, and the saturation is 97.5%. Now in the case of deoxygenated blood, in which the partial pressure of oxygen is 40 mmHg, in which the partial pressure of oxygen is 45 mmHg, okay, and hemoglobin is 75% saturated with the oxygen. So you can see at 40% of mmHg, at the 40 mmHg, the 75% saturation will be there. Okay, so we can see the 100 ml of blood releases 5 ml of oxygen to tissue fluid, we can see. Okay, so during vigorous exercise, due to more demand of oxygen, the hemoglobin delivers 75% oxygen to tissue fluid. Okay, so this is the sigmoid curve which is observed when we plot a curve between this partial pressure of oxygen and to the saturation of the hemoglobin. Now if the body temperature increases and the CO2 concentration increases, there are different factors on which this dissociation curve basically depends. There are different factors on which this dissociation curve will be depending, mainly depending on the temperature, okay, and the concentration of CO2 and the pH, acidity, etc. So then whenever such conditions are occurring, whenever the temperature is increasing or the CO2 concentration is increasing, or because the pH is getting decreased, acidity increasing, right? So under such condition, what will happen? The dissociation curve of oxyhemoglobin shift towards the right, will be shifting towards the right, which means the dissociation of oxyhemoglobin take place, okay, and the oxygen dissociation curve of myoglobin is hyperbolic. This is the normal blood cells. We are basically seeing this oxygen dissociation curve of the hemoglobin, but when we see in the myoglobin, the oxygen dissociation curve in the myoglobin, that is in the case of the muscle cells. So over there it is hyperbolic. and function of myoglobin is to store oxygen in muscles, because over there the function is particularly to store the oxygen in the muscles. Okay, so here it is sigmoid, over there it will be the hyperbolic. You have to note it down. Now it will be basically affected. It will be affected by different factors, mainly by changing the temperature, increasing the pH, decreasing the pH, CO2 concentration. So if the temperature is increased, concentration of CO2 is increased, pH is decreased, or we can say acidity increase, under such condition what will happen? This sigmoid curve of this sigmoid dissociation curve will shift towards the right side. Okay, or we can say the more dissociation of the oxyhemoglobin will take place. Okay, so that's about the dissociation curve. So let us discuss it once again. So oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve is a curve which is plotted between the partial pressure of oxygen and the percentage saturation of the hemoglobin, and it is basically sigmoid shape. Now P50 can be defined as the partial pressure of oxygen at which the hemoglobin is half saturated. Okay, now if in oxygenated blood hemoglobin is 97% saturated with oxygen, okay, while the partial pressure is 100 mmHg. But in the case of deoxygenated blood, where the partial pressure is or oxygen is 40 mmHg, but still the hemoglobin is 75% saturated. Okay, so in a single circulation, the hemoglobin will be releasing around 22% of oxygen in tissue fluid. Okay, in a single circulation, we have seen the 97 minus 75, it will be around 22%, right? So in the single circulation of hemoglobin, the hemoglobin will be releases around 22% of oxygen to the tissue fluid. It will be varying from 20 to 25%, but as precisely we can say 22% of oxygen to the tissue fluid. Now, during the vigorous exercise, due to the more demand of oxygen, the hemoglobin delivers 75% of oxygen to the tissue fluid. Under the normal condition, it will be delivering 22%, but during the normal higher condition, that is vigorous exercising, what may happen? It will release the 75% of oxygen to the tissue fluid. Okay, so we have seen under the high temperature, concentration increase, CO2 concentration increase, decrease in pH or increasing acidity, the dissociation of the oxyhemoglobin shifts to the right, which means that the more dissociation of the oxyhemoglobin will be taking place. Now the oxygen dissociation curves of myoglobin is hyperbolic. So as compared to the oxyhemoglobin, we can say the function of the same curve for the dissociation between the myoglobin will be hyperbolic, because the function of myoglobin is to store the oxygen in the muscles, because the main function of the myoglobin is to store the oxygen in the muscles. Now there's one more thing, there's the Bohr effect. So in the active tissues there is an increased concentration of CO2. So in the active tissue, which are basically carrying out the different biochemical reaction, what will happen? The carbon dioxide concentration will get increased. Due to a higher concentration of CO2, what will happen? The H plus ions will also increases. The H plus ion also will increases, due to which the CO2 reacts with the carbonic acid. Okay, so both these factors include that is increase of CO2 and increase of H plus ions. Okay, so that is increase of CO2 and due to increase of H plus ions, or we can say increasing the acidity, include the oxyhemoglobin to give up more oxygen. So due to this Bohr effect, due to high amount of HCO3, H plus ions and high amount of CO2, what will happen? What should happen? The oxygen should be removed out from this hemoglobin. It should be given up by the hemoglobin. Okay, this phenomenon is called as Bohr effect. Bohr effect plays a crucial role in enhancing the release of oxygen in tissues. So Bohr effect will be responsible for, so when CO2 is high and temperature and the pH is high, what will happen? pH is low, what will happen? The oxygen will be dissociated instantly or easily from the hemoglobin, and that hence we can say Bohr effect will be playing a very important role in enhancing the release of oxygen in the tissues where the pH is low and carbon dioxide amount is high. Okay, that was about the transportation of oxygen. So here you can see this Bohr effect. So when this concentration, here you can see pH is low. Okay, pH is low. So when the pH is low, what will happen? It will shift towards the right side. Right side. Okay. So this is mainly found in the tissues where the oxygen binding will be less. So the oxygen will be dissociated. So in the tissues, high concentration of H plus, high CO2. These all conditions are mainly found in the tissues. Okay, in the tissues, what all conditions are found? H plus concentration is high. Okay, due to the reaction of CO2 plus H2O. Next, it will be also having high CO2 concentration due to different type of biochemical reactions, particularly releasing the CO2. And due to this, what will happen? The oxygen affinity will be decreased to the hemoglobin, and hence the oxygen will be removed, and so the sigmoid curve will be shifting towards the right side, over here. But when in the case of lungs, what will happen? There is a concentration of hydrogen ion is low, and even the concentration of CO2 is also low. So the O2 affinity increases. O2 will be having high binding capacity to the hemoglobin, and hence the sigmoid curve will be shifting to the left. Okay, and that is basically called as Bohr effect. It is called as Bohr effect. Okay, that was about the transportation of the oxygen. Now next is the transportation of the carbon dioxide. Next will be the transportation of carbon dioxide. Okay, so when we say carbon dioxide, so it will be transported into mainly three forms. The transportation of carbon dioxide will be taking place majorly in the three forms. The transportation of the carbon dioxide will be taking place majorly in the three forms, that is the as dissolved form. So 7% of the total carbon dioxide is transported as dissolved form in water of plasma. So out of total carbon dioxide, the 7% of the total carbon dioxide is transported as the dissolved form in the water of plasma. Second, as a carbamino hemoglobin. So we know that the hemoglobin has also got the affinity for the carbon dioxide, but it won't be as much affinity as the case of oxygen. Okay, but still around 23% of the total carbon dioxide, will be combining with the hemoglobin, or we can say specifically with the amino group of globin protein of hemoglobin to form a carbamino hemoglobin. So around 23% of the total carbon dioxide will be transported in the form of carbamino hemoglobin, which is formed by the combination of carbon dioxide with the amino group of globin protein, to form a carbamino hemoglobin. Okay, that is of 23% of total carbon dioxide will be transported in this form. The third form is the bicarbonate compound, that is around 70% of the total carbon dioxide will be transported in bicarbonate compounds. So the carbonic anhydrase is an enzyme. It's one of the fastest enzyme known. Okay, it's an enzyme which will be increasing the rate of formation of carbon dioxide plus CO2. So the carbon dioxide, CO2 plus H2O, these are the two components which will reacting to form the carbonic acid, that's H2CO3, or we can say bicarbonate ions. Okay, so this reaction will be taking place under the effect of carbonic anhydrase, under the presence of carbonic anhydrase. The carbonic anhydrase is known to be one of the fastest enzyme. It is known to be one of the fastest enzyme. Keep it in mind. Okay, so what happens? The CO2 which is present inside this tissues will be removed out in the blood. Over the blood will be having the water and this enzyme carbonic anhydrase. So in the presence of this carbonic anhydrase, what will happen? The CO2 will be reacting with the H2O and forming the molecule of H2CO3, which will be getting ionized to form HCO3. Okay, to maintain the equilibrium. So this will be the major part of the carbon dioxide, that is around 70% of the total carbon dioxide is being transported into bicarbonate form. Okay, and it is formed by the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. Now this bicarbonate compounds also act as a buffer. It means it maintains the pH of the blood. It also acts as a buffer and diffuses from RBC to plasma. So it will be diffusing from the RBC to plasma, and it will be responsible for maintaining the pH of the blood. Now this bicarbonate ions, that is HCO3, will be also combining with sodium to form sodium bicarbonate. Okay, and this also responsible for maintaining the equilibrium, that is HCO3 ions and Cl ions are also diffused into RBC from the plasma. So to maintain the equilibrium, what happens? The carbonate ions and the chlorine ions also diffuses in RBC from the plasma. So we know that what happens? This CO2 and H2O will be reacting to form H2CO3. Okay, which will be responsible for transportation of CO2 of around 70% of total CO2. Okay, and this HCO3 bicarbonate ions will be also acting as a buffer. Okay, by how? It will be diffuses from the RBC to plasma. It will be getting diffused from the RBC to plasma. Okay, to maintain this ionic equilibrium, what will happen? This HCO3 and ions, chlorine ions, also diffuses in RBC from the plasma. So this will be in opposite direction, and this is called as chloride shift or Hamburger phenomena. It's called as chloride shift or Hamburger phenomena. So chlorine ions combine with the potassium and to form a potassium chloride over there. So let us see over here. So this is the plasma and this is the erythrocytes plasma, and this is the RBC. Now what happens? The CO2 is getting inside, CO2 is getting this into RBC, where it reacts with the H2O. So it will be present in the presence of H2O, the CO2 will be reacting with each other to form H2OCO3, that is carbonate ions, bicarbonate, in the presence of enzyme anhydrase, carbonic anhydrase. Now the H2CO3 will go and undergo ionization, will be responsible for formation of H plus HCO3 ions. Now this HCO3 ions will be moving outside this erythrocytes into plasma. When this move outside this erythrocytes, this chlorine will be shifting inside, so that the balancing should be done, so that the balancing of the charges should be equal. Okay, so what we can say, to maintain the equilibrium, this when the HCO3 is moving outside, the chlorine gets shifted inside. Okay, and this phenomena is called as chloride shift, or we can say Hamburger phenomena. We can say it's Hamburger phenomena or chloride shift, or we can say Hamburger phenomena. So mainly the carbon dioxide will be transported in the dissolved form, that is 7%, carboimmunohemoglobin, that is around 23%, and the major form of carbon dioxide which is form of transportation is in the form of bicarbonate compounds, that is H2CO3 or HCO3, that is around 70% of the total carbon dioxide. Okay, and it is also responsible for causing the chloride shift or Hamburger phenomena, where to compensate the loss of this HCO3 from the RBC to the plasma, the Cl from the plasma will be getting inside to the RBC, and this shift is called as chloride shift or Hamburger phenomena. And this H2CO3 is formed under the presence of an enzyme, carbonic anhydrase, which is one of the most fastest enzymes known. Okay, now after the transportation of the carbon dioxide and oxygen, let us see the regulation of respiration. Okay, now there are nervous control of the breathing. There are different controls present in the brain, particularly for the breathing. Okay, so the breathing is directly controlled by the nervous system, or we can say the brain, central nervous system particularly. So we can say there are 4 centers in the brain. So respiration or breathing is basically regulated by the central nervous system, as we know, and there are 4 main centers of the control of for the control of the breathing in the brain. There are 4 centers in brain which regulate the breathing. The first inspiratory center, then the apneustic center, pneumotaxic center, and the expiratory center. Let us discuss each of them in a brief. Okay, so these 4 centers are inspiratory center. First one is the inspiratory center, second apneustic center, and third one is pneumotaxic center. So inspiratory center, apneustic center, pneumotaxic center, and the expiratory center. Let us start with the inspiratory center. This is located on the dorsal surface of medulla. So called as dorsal group of neuron. It is also called as dorsal group of neuron. Now it is under the control of chemical control. It is under the chemical control. So what happens when the carbon dioxide concentration, when CO2 concentration high, when the concentration of CO2 increases, means oxygen concentration decreases. Okay, so whenever the concentration of CO2 increases and the oxygen decreases, what will happen? This center stimulate and generate an impulse of contraction. This inspiratory center will generate and stimulate the impulse of contraction. This impulse goes to diaphragm. In the thoracic cavity, we know that the part of which is responsible for separating both the parts. Okay, so this impulse will be going to the diaphragm through the phrenic nerve. This is important. This impulse will be moving to the diaphragm through the phrenic nerve. Okay, through the phrenic nerve and through intercostal nerve, they goes to EICM. So here the 2 nerves are basically responsible. The phrenic nerve will be transferring this stimulus or transferring this impulse to the radial muscle of the diaphragm, while the intercostal nerve will be passing this stimulus or the impulse to the external intercostal muscles. Okay, due to which what will happen, the radial muscles will contract and the intercostal muscles will contract, and hence due to this contraction, what will happen, the inspiration will take place. So first control is the inspiratory center, which is found in the dorsal surface of the medulla, So when the concentration is high and the CO2 is high and oxygen is low, what will happen? It will stimulate and generate the impulse. It will stimulate and generate the impulse in the phrenic nerve. Okay, so this impulse will be generated in this particular center, inspiratory center, and through this inspiratory center, this impulse will be passed to the radial muscles and the intercostal muscles of the diaphragm and EICM, that is external intercostal muscles, respectively. Okay, so through the phrenic nerve and the intercostal nerve. So this increasing concentration of CO2 and decreasing oxygen will be responsible for the inspiration, which is under the regulation of the inspiratory center, which is present at the medulla. Okay, next is the apneustic center. This center is basically located in the pons. This is again a part of the hindbrain. So apneustic center, mainly the hindbrain is responsible for the regulation of breathing and all that, right? So the apneustic center, it's basically located in the pons region of the hindbrain, where the aponeusis refers to the inspiratory gaps. Okay, so once we basically inspire, between two inspiration there will be a pace, there will be a specific gap present between them. Okay, so this is referring to that particular gap only. So this aponeusis refers to the inspiratory gap, which facilitates the inspiration and it prolongs the inspiration, we can say. Okay, it also prolongs the inspiration when oxygen requirement is increased. So whenever the oxygen requirement is increased, what will happen? The inspiration has to be prolonged. Okay, and this is something which is basically taken care by this apneustic center, and hence we can say it controls the depth of respiration. So if the organism requires, if particularly the human beings we are talking about, so if it is carrying out an exercise, what will happen? So it will require higher amount of oxygen. So the requirement of oxygen has increased, due to which what will happen? The gap between two inspiration will increase, and this will cause the prolonged inspiration. And it controls the depth of respiration. Okay, that is the apneustic center. Next, the pneumotaxic center. It is located on the dorsal surface of pons feruli. It is also part of the hindbrain. Okay, so pneumotaxic center is also located at the dorsal surface of the pons feruli, and this area controls other two centers and cuts their inspiration at a certain point. Okay, so this area also controls two centers. And cuts off the inspiration at a certain point to make sure that the inspiration does not continue too long. So it will be just functioning against the apneustic center. So it will be controlling two centers in such a manner that the inspiration should not be too long. So it should be cut at a particular point. Okay, it should be cut at a particular point so that the inspiration should be not so long. In this sense, the pneumotaxic center helps to control the rate of respiration. So it will be just functioning opposite to the apneustic center. So here we can say it is responsible for controlling the rate of respiration. For example, it shuts off the hyperstimulated inspiratory center in response to the strenuous exercise, preventing overinflation of lungs. So whenever the person is carrying out the highly stressful exercise, what will happen? It will cause the higher breathing rate, due to which the lungs will be acquiring a lot of oxygen. So this pneumotaxic center will be inhibiting this process, so that the inflation of lungs should be prevented. Last one is the expiratory center. Which lies at the ventral surface of the medulla, which is again a part of the hindbrain. Now this is responsible for the forceful breathing only. This expiratory center is responsible for the forceful breathing only, and it will be generating the impulses for the forceful inspiration, and a few group of neuron for the forceful expiration will be present over here. This center does not play any important role in the normal breathing. So particularly this center will be acting on the inner intercostal muscles. Okay, it will be acting in the inner intercostal muscles, which is related to the forceful breathing only, and this forceful breathing is basically called as thoracic breathing. It's also called as thoracic breathing. Okay, normal breathing is called as abdominal breathing, while forceful breathing is called as thoracic breathing, mainly found in the pregnant women. Okay, So that was about the different centers regulating this respiration. Let us revise once again. So nervous control centers in the central brain, mainly present in the central nervous system, mainly in the hindbrain. We have got 4 different centers for regulating this respiration process. That is inspiratory center, located at the dorsal surface of medulla, and it is under the control of chemicals. When the concentration of CO2 is high, it stimulates and generates the impulse of contraction. This will be responsible for generating impulses which will contract two muscles. The one is the radial muscles for diaphragm, and the second is the intercostal muscles of the intercostal muscles. Okay, and through the phrenic nerve and the intercostal nerve. So this will be responsible for the inspiration. Second is the apneustic center. It is mainly located in the pons, which is responsible for the gaps present between these two inspiration, and hence it extends it prolongs the inspiration, and in such a way it will be controlling the depth of respiration. Third one is the pneumotaxic center. The pneumotaxic center is basically at the dorsal surface of the pons alveoli. It is also present at the dorsal surface of the pons alveoli, that is a part of hindbrain. It is responsible for functioning just against this apneustic center. Where this will be responsible for cutting off the inspiration. So it will make sure that the inspiration does not continue for too long, and hence we can say it controls the rate of respiration. Last one is the expiratory center. It is the one which is present on the ventral surface of medulla, and it is only responsible for the causing the forceful breathing. Okay, and mainly called as the thoracic breathing. So it does not play any role in the normal breathing. Okay, so it does not play any role in the abdominal breathing, and it will be acting by contracting the muscles of the inner intercostal muscles of the ribs. Okay, that's all about the regulation. Next is the Hering-Breuer reflex. So it's a type of reflex which is found in the alveoli. So this is the reflex which prevents the overstretching of the bursting of alveoli. So when suppose the higher amount of oxygen, higher amount of gas is filled within this alveoli, what may happen? It may burst up due to the overstretching. So the wall of alveoli, that is the epithelial wall of alveoli, will be having some specific receptors called as stretch receptors present on its wall. So the alveoli will be having the stretch receptors present on its wall, which are basically when get completely filled. So when this alveolar wall will get completely filled, what will happen? They will be responsible for imparting a pressure on these stretch receptors. Those stretch receptors will be receiving the senses when they get completely filled. When they get completely filled, these stretch receptors will be responsible for generating the impulses within them. These impulses are carried or transmitted to the brain via vagus nerve. These impulses are transmitted to the brain via the vagus nerve, and this will be responsible for inhibiting the inspiratory center. We know that inspiratory center is the one which is responsible for causing the inspiration by contraction of the muscles, inspiratory muscles, right? So when the amount of air is so high, amount of gas is so high, and the alveoli gets filled totally, so the stretch receptors which are present in the alveolar wall will get sense and will generate impulse. This impulse is now transmitted to the brain. Okay, to the brain through the vagus nerve, and within the brain it will be responsible for inhibiting the inspiratory center, and hence it will be controlling the rate of inspiration. So here we can say the inspiratory center, phrenic nerve, will be responsible for contraction of diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, due to which the lungs will be basically stretched. The lungs will be filled with the air. So when this lungs and the alveolar walls are particularly filled with air, high amount of air, this alveoli will get stretched up, due to which it will be generating an impulse which will be transmitted to the central nervous system with the help of vagus nerve, and this response will be inhibitory in nature, so that when this response is arrived, so this will be inhibiting this inspiratory center, and hence the inspiration rate will be decreased. This is how the regulation of breathing is taking place. Regulation of breathing will be taking place. Okay. Next is the respiration rhythm center. This is the particular part of the nervous system mainly found in the central nervous system, that is in the brain. which is very sensitive to the CO2, which is very sensitive to the CO2 and H plus concentration. So in a brain we have got a specific center. In a brain we have got a specific center called as respiratory rhythm center. Okay, now this is the one which is responsible for controlling the respiration rate. So when the concentration of CO2 is high, when the concentration of CO2 and H plus ions, when the concentration of CO2 and H plus ion is so high, what will happen? The receptors associated with this arc with aortic arc and the carotid artery recognize these are the two arteries which are responsible for basically this particular regulation. Okay, so what will happen? So when the concentration will be so high, when the concentration of CO2 and this H plus is high, this will activate this center. This concentration of CO2 and higher H plus ion will be activate the center, and which in turn causes the rhythm center to make necessary adjustment in the respiratory process by which this substance can be eliminated. So when the concentration of CO2 and H plus is high, this concentration will activate the center in such a way that this will be responsible for decreasing the concentration of CO2 and H plus ion. Okay, so the role of oxygen in regulation of respiratory rhythm is quite insignificant. So we can say the CO2 is the one which is more responsible for regulation compared to the oxygen. So oxygen's role in regulating the respiration rate is quite insignificant nature. Next is the disorder. What we have seen the regulation of the mechanism, then the exchange at different places, okay, and then the transportation of the carbon dioxide and oxygen, and now we'll be seeing the disorders of the excretory system, disorders of the breathing, disorders of the respiratory system. We'll be seeing the disorders of the respiratory systems. Okay, so let us see. First of all, the bronchial asthma. So the name itself suggests. So what is this? Here the allergens, which is the foreign particles particularly, or maybe sometimes some particles which are not recognized by the body, It may be in the different forms like pollen grain, dust particles, something like that. Okay, so bronchial asthma. So what happens whenever the allergens are coming in contact with the body? Whenever some allergens are coming in contact with the body, it will stimulate the mast cell. The mast cell are the specific type of cells which are present, immunity cells. There are the specific type of immunity cells present in the lungs, particularly, we can say right now. Okay, so they will stimulate the mast cell to produce histamine. Histamine is an anti-allergic molecule. So this will be produced mainly due to the allergen. So this histamine will be responsible for contraction of the smooth muscles of bronchi. Okay, so what happens whenever the any allergen foreign particles is basically getting inside the body, it will come in contact with the immunity system, due to which the mast cell will be releasing a specific compound called histamine, which will be responsible for contraction of the smooth muscles of bronchi, and this will lead to the symptoms like coughing and difficulty in the breathing, mainly during the expiration, and even the breathing while with wheezing sound. When the breathing will be there, it will be with a different type of sound. This condition is called as bronchial asthma. Okay, next is the emphysema. Emphysema is nothing but the inflation, or we can say full of air. So when the lungs are basically full of air, and which causes the damage to the lung walls, which will cause the damage to the alveolar wall. So we can say distensions of the bronchial or the alveolar sac. So this is basically the breaking down of the alveolar wall. This is the breaking down of the alveolar wall, or we can say bronchial or even the alveolar sac. Mainly it occurs due to cigarette smoking. Because the carbon monoxide, which is unburnt particle or carbon particle, which will be getting absorbed on the wall of alveoli, which due to after a particular period of time, these walls which has got this carbon attached with them, deposited on them, will become fragile, and then they will start breaking down. Okay, and hence this flexibility of the bronchial wall or the alveolar walls will be decreased. Okay, so it is the distension of bronchial or alveolar sac, mainly occurs due to the cigarette smoking. The septa present between the alveoli are dissolved and elasticity is elastic tissue replaced by the fibrous connective tissue. As I told you, the flexibility and the elasticity will be decreased, and they will become fragile, due to which the septum present within the alveoli will be broken down, and hence the bronchiole becomes non-elastic, and alveoli remains filled with air even after exhalation. So even the exhalation is done, but still, because the bronchioles become inelastic, so the alveoli will be filled with air, and hence it is called as emphysema. And it's called as emphysema. So here you can see this is normal lung where the proper septum are basically observed within this alveoli, okay, within the alveolar sacs. While in the case of emphysema, such lungs are basically filled with the air, and this will not be having the alveolar sac present with them. Alveolar sac will be dissolved, while the membrane or the cell, the alveolar wall will be losing its elasticity, and now they are basically replaced by the fibrous connective tissue, which will be broken down when used further, okay, and hence this will not be able to contract properly, and hence it will be remain filled with air, and this is called as emphysema. Under such condition, the person will not be able to respire properly, okay. Next is the bronchitis. Bronchitis is the inflammation of the bronchi. It's the inflammation of the bronchi due to cigarette smoking, air pollutant like CO, or sometimes it may be due to the microbial infection as well. Okay, the bronchitis is the inflammation of the bronchi. It may be caused due to different type of problems, like mainly the cigarette smoking, or maybe due to the air pollutant like the carbon monoxide, and it may occur due to some specific type of microbial infection as well. Okay, next is the pneumonia. So pneumonia is an acute infection and inflammation of the lung alveoli. So it's a specific type of infection, or we can say infection of a particular bacteria called as Streptococcus pneumonia, or we can say Mycoplasma. These are the main two bacteria which will be causing this pneumonia. Okay, so it is the acute infection of the lungs, okay, and due to which the inflammation of the lung alveoli will occur. The symptom consists of the alveoli becomes acutely inflamed, they will be getting inflamed, and most of the air space filled with the mucus and fluid with the WBC. The air space present within the alveoli or the whole lungs will be filled up with the mucus which is secreted during this inflammation, and also with the WBC, which are responsible for fighting against these infections. Okay, the lungs will be filled with the mucus and the WBC particularly. Apart from these disorders, there are some other disorders also, diseases as well, which are related to the occupation of the person. So the occupation, in different type of occupation, the person will be exposed to some type of substances, or we can say that some harmful substances which will be responsible for causing some disorders or diseases in the person, mainly in the respiratory diseases. Okay, so these are the silicosis and asbestosis. These are the one which are mainly found in the region where the factories will be releasing out this asbestosis and the silicosis, mainly the one where you find the formation of this roof and all that. Next is pneumoconiasis. This is the where the coal workers, mainly found in the people who are working in the coal mines and coal factories and all that. Okay, and the last one is the biocinosis. Biocinosis is a type of occupational lung disease which is mainly found in the people who are working continuously in the cotton industry. Okay, next is diphtheria. Diphtheria is the inflammation and the enlarging of the mucous lining. So we know the mucous lining present in the trachea and all that, so they may get inflamed due to the infection of the particular bacteria called as Corynebacterium diphtheriae. So it is also provided, normally the vaccination is available, so it would not be, now it's not a big problem, otherwise without vaccination it was a big problem. Now the diphtheria is the inflammation of and the enlarging of the mucous lining, and is caused by the Corynebacterium diphtheriae. Okay, next, tuberculosis. It's a type of disease which is mainly is widely found in the countries like India and Africa, and particularly India. Is caused by the bacterium called as Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And rhinitis, it's inflammation of nasal. This is a different condition which is basically found in different diseases, right? Example, rhinitis, it's inflammation of nasal mucosa. Okay, next is pleurisy, inflammation of pleuri. We have seen that the pleural cavity will be, the pleural fluid will be increasing amount of pleural fluid due to infection. It's called pleurisy. It will be associated with the chest pain and the difficulty in breathing as well. The mountain sickness is the condition where the person will be are not able to survive or not be able to be fit or not be feeling comfortable at the lower concentration of oxygen due to the mountain altitude. So at the high altitude the concentration of oxygen will be low, and at the low concentration the person will not be feeling comfortable, and that's called as mountain sickness. Okay, and some terms, let us discuss some terms, meaning of some terms. Apnea is absence of breathing, total breathing. Eupnea is the normal breathing, okay, and dyspnea is the painful breathing. Many times the difficulty in breathing is called as dyspnea. Orthopnea is the inability to breathe in a horizontal position. So when a person is basically not able to breathe horizontally, it is called as orthopnea. Acapnea is basically the absence of CO2 in the blood. Hypocapnia, deficiency of CO2 in blood. Hypercapnia is an excess of CO2 in the blood. Hypoxemia is a lack of oxygen in the arterial blood. Anoxia, absence of oxygen tissues. Hypoxia, lack of O2 in tissue. Okay, anoxia is totally absence of O2, while hypoxia is the lack of oxygen. Tachypnea or hyperpnea is rapid breathing. Bradypnea or hypopnea is slow breathing, and coastal breathing is a shallow chest breathing. Okay, now let us see the breathing rate. Okay, so number of breathings per minute in the case of humans it is 15 to 18. Newborn will be having the higher rate of breathing, that is around 40 to 50. Around up to the 5 years it will be showing the breathing rate will be of around 25, and when the person is basically get aged at around 50 years the breathing rate will be again increased to 18 to 25, and normal human adult up to 50 years it will be around 15 to 18. In the case of rabbit the breathing rate will be 36 to 38. Pulmonary ventilation is always more than the alveolar. So there are two pulmonary ventilation and the alveolar ventilation. So what do you mean by pulmonary ventilation and the alveolar ventilation? Let us see. Okay, so the pulmonary ventilation is basically the one which is basically caused by the lungs particularly. Okay, and alveolar ventilation is only the ventilation exchange of gases taking place only by at the alveolar level. So pulmonary ventilation will be higher because it will be also including the dead space as well. Okay, so it's always more than the alveolar ventilation. Respiratory quotient is basically measured by a specific device called as Ganong's respirometer. So respiratory quotient can be defined as the total amount of CO2 eliminated, total volume of CO2 eliminated about divided by total volume of oxygen which is consumed. So by getting this we can get to know about the respiratory quotient. Different respiratory pigments in different organisms. Okay, so hemoglobin is red in color, contains the metal particularly that is Fe, mainly found in the vertebrae, earthworm, nereis and different other organisms, right? Hemocyanin will be blue in color, containing the metal Cu, mainly found in the mollusca and the arthropoda. Erythrocyanonin red in color, Fe, mainly found in the leech. Hemoerythrin red in color, having Fe, mainly found in Annelida. Okay, then it's a chloroquinonin green color, mainly having the Fe, found in the Annelida, Sabella and the serpullids. Okay, Echinochrome red in color, presence of Fe and echinodermata. Vanadium green color, having vanadium present in it, is basically mainly found in the urochordata. Pinoglobulin brown in color, presence of manganese and mainly found in the pinna. And molybdenum brown in color, presence of molybdenum and mainly found in the holothuria. Okay, that's what different type of pigments responsible for the respiration, hence called as respiratory pigment. Okay, that was all about this respiration and the breathing. Okay, so we have done the whole structures of the respiratory tract. Okay, right from nasal cavity, trachea, pharynx, trachea, tracheal structures. Okay, then the lungs structure, functioning of lung, mechanism of breathing. Then we have seen the transportation of the exchange of gases from between lungs and blood, between blood and tissue, and then the transportation of oxygen, transportation of CO2, and regulation of this transportation, regulation of this breathing. Okay, and then we had seen the different types of spirometry. Okay, and lastly we have seen the different type of breathing rates and all that different terms which are basically normally used during the respiration. And then we have seen the disorders associated with the respiration and breathing. And lastly we have seen the respiratory pigments in different organisms. So that's all for right now, and in the next lecture we'll be starting the another topic. In the next lecture we'll be starting the another chapter. Okay, so that's all for this topic. Thank you and have a nice day. Bye bye.